The rhythmic hum of rolling suitcases and the drone of overhead announcements created a familiar symphony inside the airport. The air carried the scent of brewed coffee mingling with the faint aroma of warm pastries from a nearby cafe. Travelers moved with purpose, some in hurried strides, while others lingered near charging stations, engrossed in their devices. Yet, amid the seemingly ordinary airport rush, an undercurrent of tension simmered, invisible to most, but undeniable to those attuned to the nuances of human behavior. Naomi Johnson stood near the check-in counter, her polished carry-on positioned neatly by her side. Her attire was impeccably chosen, a navy blue pantsuit, a crisp white blouse, and low-heeled shoes that balanced professionalism with comfort. Her deep brown eyes swept over the counter agent before her, reading her body language as one would decipher a coded message. The woman, Jill, exuded a rigid demeanor, her gaze cool as she regarded Naomi with an air that suggested more than just professional detachment. Naomi's travel history was extensive. Airports were as familiar to her as her own home, yet anonymity was her greatest tool. To the outside world, she was just another traveler, but in reality, she was a covert operative for Homeland Security. Her assignments required her to move unseen, gathering intelligence, intercepting threats, and ensuring national security, all without revealing her true identity. Her latest mission was simple in theory: fly to Chicago, track a suspect known only as Silver Hawk, and relay critical intel to her team. But nothing in her line of work ever remained simple. The moment she handed over her ID and boarding pass, she sensed a shift. Jill hesitated, her expression tightening ever so slightly. Naomi noted the flicker of hesitation, the subtle narrowing of Jill's eyes as they skimmed over the details on the screen before her. "Ms. Johnson, you said you're on the flight to Chicago." Jill's voice carried an edge of skepticism, her fingers tapping away at the keyboard. Naomi nodded, her tone even. "That's correct. I booked directly through the airline's website." Jill hummed non-committally, her eyes darting between Naomi's ID and the screen. "I'm not seeing your booking in the system. Are you sure you didn't book through a third-party site?" Naomi's pulse remained steady, but she didn't miss the weight of the moment. She had reviewed every detail before leaving her hotel. Her booking was in order. "I have a confirmation number if that helps," she said, offering the neatly printed itinerary. Jill took the paper but barely glanced at it before shaking her head. "It's not showing up. You'll have to step aside while I assist the next customer." Naomi inhaled slowly. The deliberate dismissal, the pointed refusal. It wasn't just an error in the system. Something else was at play. "I'd like to speak to a supervisor," she said, keeping her tone measured. Jill sighed, but motioned to a man behind the counter. Moments later, a neatly dressed man with a badge reading "Stephen Mercer, Floor Supervisor," stepped forward. "Ms. Johnson, I understand there's an issue with your reservation?" Naomi withdrew a discreet leather wallet, flipping it open just enough to reveal the Department of Homeland Security badge. She kept it low so passing passengers wouldn't see, but Jill's mouth fell open, the color draining from her face. Her lips parted, forming silent words before she rasped out a shaky breath. Her expression vacillated between shock and indignation. "Undercover?" Jill's voice barely rose above a whisper, as if even saying the word too loudly would make it more real. Naomi's words were measured, quiet, each syllable weighed with the gravity of her authority. "Undercover, Department of Homeland Security. Your actions are jeopardizing a major federal investigation. If you alert anyone else or cause a diversion, you could be charged with obstructing a federal operation." A flicker of panic crossed Jill's eyes. She stammered, grasping for an explanation. "But I was certain you were lying. I've seen so many—" She trailed off, searching for an excuse, a justification for her hostility. Naomi pressed on. "I understand you might have had concerns, but you need to stand down. Right now. I have a suspect on this plane. When we land in Chicago, local DHS will apprehend them. Your interference could ruin everything." Jill's lips trembled, frustration and fear warring in her expression. Then, almost like an involuntary slip, she muttered, "But you're black." The words landed like a slap. Naomi felt a sharp sting of anger, but she swallowed it, keeping her focus on the mission. "That's your prejudice talking," she said, her tone unwavering. "And I don't have time to argue about it right now. You have two choices. You can let me do my job, or you can make a choice that will cost you yours. Do you understand?" Jill blinked rapidly, her throat working as she swallowed. Slowly she nodded, her gaze shifting downward, unable to meet Naomi's eyes. Naomi recognized the swirl of emotions playing across Jill's face. Guilt, humiliation, the abrupt collapse of her supposed moral high ground. A heavy silence settled between them, punctuated only by the distant clink of the beverage cart. I'm sorry, Jill croaked finally. I didn't know. Naomi's face remained impassive. Stay out of my way for the rest of this flight. Do not mention a word to anyone. That is an order. She snapped the leather wallet shut, sliding it back into her blazer. We have a suspect to catch. Without waiting for a response, Naomi turned and strode back to her seat, leaving Jill standing in the galley, stunned and speechless. The rest of the flight passed in tense silence. Naomi remained seated, focused, while Jill disappeared, presumably confining herself to a jump seat or choosing to remain out of sight. The suspect in row 20 dozed, his baseball cap pulled low, or at least pretended to. Naomi eyed him occasionally, strategizing the best way to move on him after landing. 30 minutes before arrival in Chicago, Naomi's phone vibrated with a coded text from Marshall. Confirmed. Seat 20E. Stand by for ground intercept. Relief spread through her. The plan was set. Now, she just needed to ensure the suspect didn't slip away in the shuffle off the plane. She discreetly readied herself for the post-landing chaos. Let the suspect disembark, tail him through the terminal, and meet up with Marshall's team for the takedown. Meanwhile, Jill made no further attempts to contact Naomi. That was fine by her. She was done with Jill's meddling. As the plane descended, flight attendants moved through the cabin, instructing passengers to store trays and return their seats to an upright position. Through the window, Naomi glimpsed the sprawling skyline of Chicago, a labyrinth of towering buildings and bustling highways. She took a calming breath, bracing for the final phase of her mission. Upon touchdown, the plane taxied to the gate. A wave of relief and anticipation washed over Naomi as she heard phones chiming, passengers unbuckling, and the usual scramble for overhead luggage. The suspect rose, collecting his hoodie and backpack, his body language eager to disembark. Naomi waited, letting him move ahead. She needed to keep her presence subtle. She followed at a measured pace, watching him through the steady stream of passengers. As she stepped into the jet bridge, Naomi kept her distance. The suspect walked with a slight limp, or maybe it was just heavy footsteps. The crowd funneled into the terminal. Her phone vibrated again. We see him. Wait near Starbucks. Marshall's team had eyes on him. Perfect. Naomi drifted toward the Starbucks kiosk near the gate exit, spotting two men in plain clothes, DHS agents she recognized, lingering with coffee cups, eyes pinned on the suspect. He had no idea. He strode toward baggage claim, glancing at his phone, oblivious. A swift, synchronized move. The agents closed in. Federal agents, stop! One barked, brandishing a badge. The suspect's head jerked up. For a split second, he considered bolting. Then, before he could make a move, they had him pinned. A flurry of motion, a gasp from bystanders. Naomi calmly approached, flashing her credentials. Silver Hawk, she said quietly, addressing the suspect by his code name. Your days of forging identities end here. His eyes burned with fury, but he had no escape. The agents cuffed him, the weight of justice sealing around his wrists. Travelers around them murmured in alarm, phones lifting to capture the scene. Airport security arrived moments later, wide-eyed. It was over. The suspect was in custody. The operation was a success. Naomi stepped back, letting the team handle the formal arrest. From the corner of her eye, she saw a nervous figure approaching. Jill. She trailed behind a uniformed Global Skies supervisor, her expression apprehensive. Miss Johnson, Jill said quietly, wringing her hands. I want to... Naomi raised a hand, cutting her off. She wasn't in the mood for a drawn-out apology. The adrenaline and relief had left her wanting only peace. You saw what happened, Naomi said, her tone neutral. I trust you understand now that I was telling the truth. Jill's face flushed. The supervisor beside her cleared his throat, addressing Naomi with utmost respect. On behalf of Global Skies, we want to apologize for any inconvenience. We would like to offer you some form of compensation and ensure we address any misconduct. Naomi looked between them. She could sense Jill's shame. A part of her wanted to lash out, to remind Jill exactly how damaging her behavior had been. But Naomi had spent years in law enforcement. She believed consequences would follow naturally. "Your airline can contact me through my department," she said, offering a curt nod. Naomi almost felt sorry for her confusion. Almost. But Jill's prejudice had nearly derailed a federal mission, putting lives at risk. Whether the airline reprimanded or dismissed her was their decision, not Naomi's. Naomi gave Jill one final, hard look. "Be careful who you judge next time," she said quietly. "We're not always who you assume." She turned away, walking toward the escalators leading to baggage claim. A long breath escaped her lungs. Justice had been served, not just for the suspect, but in some small way for every assumption and bias that had ever stood in her way. She had done her job, and she had won. "Yes," Naomi said, handing over her confirmation once more. "Your agent says my ticket isn't in the system, but I booked directly through the airline." Stephen took the document and tapped at his keyboard. Unlike Jill, he seemed intent on solving the issue. Within moments, his brows knitted together. "Your reservation is in here, but there's a note requiring additional identification verification. That's odd." Naomi's fingers curled slightly at her side. A flag on her alias was a potential security risk. "My ID is valid, and it matches the reservation." "What's the issue?" Stephen offered an apologetic smile. "I'll override it. Shouldn't be a problem." As he processed the boarding pass, Jill's mouth tightened, but she said nothing. Naomi didn't miss the subtle frustration in her gaze. Had this been a personal bias, or was something more sinister at play? As the pass printed, she noticed Jill discreetly pick up the phone. Naomi walked away, her mind churning. Was Jill making a complaint, venting to a colleague, or alerting someone to Naomi's presence? It was an unsettling possibility. Security was the next hurdle. The checkpoint was routine, a monotonous part of travel Naomi had long since mastered. She placed her bag on the conveyor belt, removed her shoes, and stepped through the body scanner. A moment later, a TSA officer motioned her aside. "Ma'am, additional screening is required," he said. Naomi's stomach tightened. She remained composed as the officer Bryant rifled through her belongings with an unsettling thoroughness. "Everything all right?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. His fingers wrapped around a small toiletry bottle, inspecting it unnecessarily. Just a standard check. Naomi wasn't convinced. She glanced back at the check-in counter where Jill still stood, phone in hand. Had she called in a request to stall Naomi further? "All right, you're good to go," Bryant finally said, returning her bag. Naomi stepped away, retrieving her belongings with precision. She felt eyes on her. Whether it was suspicion, curiosity, or something more dangerous, she couldn't be sure. What she did know was that every delay chipped away at her carefully structured mission. Boarding was another test of patience. As she approached the gate, a different airline employee gestured her to the side. "Ms. Johnson, can you step over here for a moment?" Naomi's fingers flexed. "Is there a problem?" "There's been an additional security check requested on your seat assignment. It'll just take a moment." Naomi's instincts screamed. This wasn't a coincidence. The agent typed into the computer before offering a bright, thin-lipped smile. "You're all set now. Enjoy your flight." Naomi walked toward the jet bridge, her every sense on high alert. The pieces were falling into place. The question wasn't whether someone had tried to prevent her from boarding. It was who, and more importantly, why. As she found her seat, she spotted a man across the aisle, his gaze lingering on her a second too long. Was he just another passenger, or was he the reason for the deliberate roadblocks in her journey? One thing was certain, Naomi wasn't just on a flight to Chicago. She was walking straight into a carefully laid trap. Naomi kept her expression neutral as she watched the agent's hands move through her bag, her every instinct screaming at her to remain still. The thoroughness of the search was unsettling, yet she knew she had nothing overtly incriminating in her luggage. Still, if he found the hidden compartment with her Homeland Security badge, everything would fall apart. Her cover, her mission, years of work potentially undone in seconds. She inhaled slowly, forcing herself to maintain her composure. The agent flipped through side pockets, rummaged deeper, but ultimately, after a few more tense moments, he found nothing. He straightened, zipped the bag shut, and gave her a curt nod. "You're free to go," he said, voice clipped, professional, but Naomi detected a hint of tension there. Was it pure coincidence that he seemed as watchful as Jill, or was something else at play? She nodded, grabbed her belongings, and left the checkpoint, but her mind lingered on the moment. Every step she took away from the screening area carried a weight of uncertainty. The morning had felt off, as though unseen threads were. Her phone remained silent. No messages from her contact. That was good. It meant no last-minute surprises. Yet, out of the corner of her eye, she spotted Jill again. The woman was making her way down the corridor toward a break room, her posture stiff, her eyes flickering in Naomi's direction before she disappeared through the door. Naomi pretended not to notice, but something gnawed at her. Was she just being paranoid? Deciding a distraction might help, she rose and walked toward a small deli nearby. A fresh sandwich and a cup of coffee might steady her nerves. As she waited in line, she overheard snippets of conversation behind her. Two men discussing a security incident at another gate. Something about a passenger with an expired passport causing delays. She tuned it out. Not relevant to her mission. By the time she returned to her seat, the tension in her shoulders had eased slightly. She ate in silence, scanning the crowd once more. No sign of the suspect, just an ordinary airport scene. But then an announcement cut through the hum of travel chatter. Attention passengers on Global Skies, Flight 472 to Chicago. Due to a minor maintenance issue, boarding will be delayed. Gate agents will provide updates shortly. A murmur of frustration rippled through the waiting area. Naomi's spine stiffened. Delays happened all the time, but today, with so many oddities piling up, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a simple maintenance delay. A delay could mean the suspect might alter his plans. If he caught wind of an agent on his trail, he could slip through the cracks before she had a chance to intercept him. She checked her phone. Still no updates from her contact. Deciding she couldn't afford to wait idly, she approached the podium where two gate agents were dealing with irritated passengers. One was a tall man with glasses and a professional air. The other, a shorter woman with curly hair focused on her tablet. Naomi waited her turn, then leaned in slightly. "Excuse me, do we have an estimate on how long the delay will be?" The tall agent glanced at her, offering a polite but apologetic nod. 15 to 20 minutes, ma'am. The aircraft needed a quick inspection, but everything should be cleared soon." Naomi nodded, though unease twisted in her gut. She stepped away, pulled out her phone, and made a quick call. The line rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. "This is Marshall. It's Naomi," she said quietly. "My flight's delayed. Any changes on Silverhawk's movements?" A brief pause, then, "Nothing new on my end. Our team is in position in Chicago. Just make sure you're on that flight. We don't want to spook the target." "Understood. Thanks." She ended the call, exhaling slowly. If the delay held at just 20 minutes, she could still make this work. She could still complete the mission. A minor argument broke out nearby, a passenger angrily waving his arms at the gate agents over a missed connection. Naomi barely spared it a glance. Airport drama, but the tension in her chest didn't ease. Then, the boarding announcement came through the speakers. "Now, boarding Global Skies, Flight 472 to Chicago. First class and priority passengers, please proceed to the gate." Naomi rose, gripping her boarding pass. Her seat was in economy, but she was in Group 2. She wouldn't have to wait long. As passengers filed through, she scrutinized every face. Still no sign of the suspect. Then, finally, Group 2 was called. She moved forward, handed her pass to the bespectacled agent who scanned it and nodded her through. "Have a good flight." Stepping onto the jet bridge, the familiar hum of the aircraft surrounded her. Inside, she located her seat. 14C, an aisle seat, perfect for movement if necessary. As passengers continued boarding, she kept her gaze on the entryway, looking for a slender man, dark hair, possibly dressed in casual streetwear. If he had altered his appearance, she would have to rely on intuition. Her phone vibrated. A text from Marshall. "Suspect is confirmed on the flight manifest. Priority watch." Her pulse quickened. He was here. Scanning the last few passengers entering the plane, her gaze landed on a young man near row 20. Black hoodie, baseball cap pulled low, restless energy in his stance. She couldn't see his face clearly, but something about him set off alarms. Was that him? The moment the words left her lips, T knew she might have gone too far. The atmosphere turned acidic, the tension thick enough to choke on. Naomi felt her pulse spike, recognizing the hostility all too well. Across from her, Greg's face twitched, his eyes flickering with restrained caution. A moment of silence stretched between them, taut and unrelenting, before Greg exhaled sharply. "All right," he said at last. "Let's make a quick call to reservations for final verification. If everything checks out, Miss Johnson will board. Miss Farrell, will that satisfy you?" Jill pursed it. Jill's expression hardened. She had no recourse, no further argument. "Fine," she snapped. "But if something goes wrong, I want it on record that I flagged her." With a sharp turn, she strode away, her presence still crackling like static in the air. Greg grimaced. "I'm so sorry about that. That was unusual." He handed Naomi a business card. "If you feel you've been treated unfairly, you can file a complaint, but I'd like to personally escort you back to your seat." Naomi forced a polite smile. "I appreciate that, Mr. Hudson." All she wanted now was to regroup, to assess whether this debacle had drawn unwanted eyes. Back on the plane, heads turned, passengers craning their necks to get a look at the source of the disruption. Naomi ignored them, focusing on one fact. She was back on board. The mission could proceed. But had the suspect noticed? That was the real question. Settling into seat 14C, she barely had time to exhale before a flight attendant appeared, concern in her expression. "Everything all right, ma'am?" "Yes, thank you." Naomi leaned back, sinking into the seat. The stress lingered, a dull ache behind her ribs. She had faced hostility before, but rarely in a way that threatened an entire operation. She refused to let Jill's grudge jeopardize the mission. The doors sealed, the engines hummed, then roared to life. Naomi whispered to herself, "You're on the plane." That's half the battle. If the suspect had noticed, he might be wary now. But he couldn't leave. They were locked together until Chicago. A crisp voice filled the cabin. "Welcome aboard Global Skies, Flight 472. Service to Chicago O'Hare. Flight time will be 1 hour and 50 minutes. The aircraft taxied, then lifted off. Naomi watched the city shrink below, glass and steel catching the morning sun. She had to refocus. Step 1, confirm the suspect's seat. Step 2, observe. Step 3, contact DHS in Chicago. At cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign dinged off. Flight attendants rolled out the drink carts. Naomi discreetly retrieved a small folder, flipping through notes on her suspect, aliases, past addresses, known associates. The man in the baseball cap, 3 rows ahead, ordered a soda. Naomi caught a clearer glimpse of his face, the jawline, the narrow nose, the restless fingers tapping against the tray table. It had to be him. Then, as if fate had a twisted sense of humor, trouble found her again. Beyond the curtain near the galley, a flight attendant stepped aside, revealing Jill. She was on the plane. Naomi stiffened. Jill hadn't been scheduled to work this flight. What was she doing here? Naomi tried to dismiss it. Maybe she was simply commuting, but instinct whispered otherwise. Then Jill made eye contact with a crew member. The silent exchange sent a ripple of unease through Naomi. Something was off. Time stretched. The suspect remained absorbed in his phone, seemingly unaware of Jill's lingering presence. Naomi had to stay calm, no distractions. She had a job to do. "We'll be encountering some turbulence shortly. Please fasten your seatbelts," the flight attendant announced. The plane trembled. Naomi kept her expression neutral, but her mind raced. Clouds thickened outside the window, the aircraft swaying as it pushed through unstable air. Then Jill was beside her. "Come with me," she ordered. Naomi didn't move. "The seatbelt sign is on," she replied evenly. "I said come with me." Jill's voice rose, drawing attention. Passengers turned. The suspect shifted in his seat. Naomi's stomach dropped. If he hadn't suspected her before, he certainly did now. A flight attendant intervened. "Miss Farrell, please take your seat." Jill bristled. "She's a security risk. I need her in the galley." Naomi clenched her jaw. "I'm not a risk. Your colleague cleared me. I'm just a passenger." The plane jolted, sending Jill stumbling. She grabbed a seat back to steady herself, fury smoldering in her eyes. "Do you want me to call the captain? We can divert this flight." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Diverting a flight was extreme, reserved for real threats. Jill was playing a dangerous game. Naomi weighed her options. "I'll go," she said smoothly. After the turbulence passes, Jill hesitated. The flight attendant pressed the advantage. "Miss Farrell, please take your seat." Jill relented, but her glare burned. The turbulence stretched on, minutes dragging. Finally, the plane leveled. The seatbelt sign blinked off. Jill shot up. "Now," she said coldly. Naomi followed her to the galley, every nerve on edge. Engine noise thrummed in the background. Jill turned on her, eyes blazing. "I talked to security. There's something off about you." "Who are you, really?" Naomi felt a sharp twist of dread. Jill's phone buzzed. She checked the screen, then slid it into her pocket, gaze hard. "Well?" Naomi made her decision. Lowering her voice, she said, "Miss Farrell, you are about to make a mistake with serious consequences." Before she could confirm, a commotion arose at the front of the cabin, a firm but polite voice cutting through the chatter. "Ma'am, I need you to come with us. There's an issue with your ticket." Naomi's blood ran cold. Jill. And standing beside her, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a security badge. Her mission was unraveling before her eyes.